Greetings folks, I am Scott Telek, author of the Swithen, the book series that remains completely faithful to the medieval legend of King Arthur. And because of that, I've spent the bulk of the last 15 years reading and writing about the Arthurian legend. And obviously no serious discussion of the Arthurian legend can be considered legitimate without mention of perhaps the most influential Arthurian film of all time, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And what we're going to do here is discuss how the movie relates to the actual Arthurian legend. So it's not about whether it's a good movie or not, because we know it's a good movie. We're talking about how much it does or does not relate to the medieval Arthurian legend. Now, we all know that quote about how explaining a joke takes away all the humor of it. So while the movie is funny, this video is not going to be all that funny. So let us temper our expectations. When I started getting into the Arthurian legend, I was curious about what movies have been made from it, and to my surprise, often listed as one of the best and most faithful adaptations is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Now, I have another video on my channel called Why Are There No Good King Arthur Movies? And short version, the legend is simply too long and involved, as well as just too weird, to cut it down into a successful standalone movie or even a TV series. The Arthurian legend is a true saga, and as such, it must remain huge for it to work. That's why I'm taking 25 novels in my book series to tell the full story, and I'm leaving a lot out. So let's dive in and discuss what makes Monty Python and the Holy Grail not only one of the best Arthurian adaptations, but one of the most faithful to the original material. The first thing to understand is that Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the movie, does not, strictly speaking, adapt any particular part of the Arthurian legend. That is, it's not like, oh, the Black Knight is referring to this part and the Knights Who Say Ni are referring to that part. The whole thing is a large-scale parody of the entire Arthurian legend, and as such, it just doesn't align one-to-one. Terry Jones, one of the ensemble and a co-director of this film, was himself a medieval scholar and wrote a very well-respected book on Chaucer. So he has the brains to create a smart parody of the whole thing without having to focus on just one element. Another big thing to understand up front is that the movie is not only making fun of the Arthurian legend. It's also making fun of other movies about medieval times, specifically how self-serious they often are. This came out in 1975, so they would have been mocking films such as The Knights of the Round Table, which is so very dreadful I can't even get all the way through it, or even the film of the musical Camelot, which came out in 1967, but would have still been hugely influential at the time. All of them tend to be overly serious, with everyone straining as hard as they can to be noble and valiant. This movie is also making fun of film itself, especially with the ludicrous music and other things like government bureaucracy and a lot of things that have nothing at all to do with the Arthurian legend. For example, the coconuts they use to make the sound of horses is something we know they actually did use in movies to create the sound effect of horses' hooves. So having it be here right out in the open is sort of a meta joke about medieval movies, but not specifically the Arthurian legend. So movies about the Arthurian legend up to this time were painfully self-serious and insufferably noble, and let's face it, sometimes the Arthurian legend is too. Everyone's standing around trying to be as valiant as possible, everything is as deadly serious as it can be, and there's just not a lot of humor, even when the story itself is utterly ridiculous. So this makes it funny to just poke holes in the wall of seriousness. So when they're doing things like pretending to ride horses or saying Camelot's a silly place, it's just funny. Even now we're used to fantasy things like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings having this aura that it is all so monumentally significant. So this whole thing, the silly voices, the ludicrous adventures, it's just kind of hilarious to treat this sacred material this way. The other thing that really strikes you when you watch this film is that everything's very dirty. The people are unclean and have bad teeth, and the castles are cruddy and filled with dirt. This is one of those things that makes this movie one of the more accurate to the Arthurian legend because it's supposedly taking place in the year 500, what we used to call the Dark Ages, and things are not clean and tidy. When we see medieval movies, they all have perfectly straight, clean white teeth and are all kissing each other and like, You ever think about what kind of breath these people must have had? And would their clothes be all perfectly clean and their whites their whitest? No, they would not. So this movie actually depicts the overall nastiness of the time pretty well. The Black Death, aka the Plague, is not in the Arthurian legend, but of course does loom large in anyone's thoughts of medieval England. There's also no witch trials whatsoever in the Arthurian legend. So these parts just kind of play on British history, but don't really reference anything specific in the Arthurian legend. Now, there are a lot of things in the movie that do have roots in the Arthurian legend, even if they still don't line up one-to-one. So now let's go into those.
I fart in your general direction.
The Frenchman who hilariously taunts King Arthur and his knights doesn't really reference any specific part of the Arthurian legend, and is probably just referring to the long-standing French-British rivalry. At the same time, it does point to a key background element of the Arthurian legend, which is the split between the British and French characters in the story. Arthur, Sir Gawain, and others are of British descent, while Lancelot and others are of French descent, and at the very end of the saga, these factions go to war on each other. So it does get at something very true about the legend, but at the same time, I suspect it wasn't written with that specifically in mind.
It's rubbish. Jacking it in and packing it up and sneaking away and buggering off and
A huge thing in the Arthurian world is nobility and honor. Since it's this generally lawless world, the knights are all kind of competing with each other to be the most worthy and honorable, and in the legend it's deadly serious. So serious it becomes kind of laughable. So the minstrels who run along behind Sir Robin saying how he's cowardly and runs away from danger is using a form that usually discusses how brave a knight is, but basically making fun of him. The other really on-the-nose parody of nobility and honor is of course the Knights of the Round Table song, which makes fun of how the knights never quit and fight to the end and their over-the-top, psychotic bravery.
running away, you yellow bastard!
Now the Knights of the Round Table are all supposed to be impossibly brave and valiant and fight to the death, and the sequence with the Black Knight is making fun of that. Like, for example, at a certain point in the legend, Arthur himself says, "I would rather die 1,000 times if I could than say a single word that anyone could consider cowardice." At a certain point, Lancelot offers to fight with one arm tied behind his back, and several times knights say that they would rather die than give up or be shamed. So the Black Knight, who gets all his legs and arms hacked off but still won't admit defeat, is making fun of that.
Who are you? We are the knights who say...
The Knights Who Say Knee doesn't seem to reference a specific thing, but it does refer to two very common elements of the Arthurian legend, one of which is very colorfully named Knights with Strange Customs, and the other is odd little quests that the knights are sent on. In terms of bizarre names and identities, in the legend there's the King with the 100 Knights, Dodinel the Wild Man, the Red Knight of the Redlands and the Green Knight of the Greenlands, the Lord of the Distant Isles, the Knight with 2 Swords, and one of my favorites, the Ugly Hero. Their sending King Arthur out to get a shrubbery is also reminiscent of certain quests the Arthurian knights need to go on, like to bring back a stag or, of course, the quest for the Holy Grail. But more often than not, the Arthurian knights aren't after a thing, but they need to complete some trial, like to free a castle from a curse, to find out why a knight is depressed, or to assist someone who's been wronged, and usually those end up leading into very long and involved adventures.
Oh, don't grovel. One thing I can't stand is people groveling.
In the legend, God himself does not appear and tell Arthur to seek the Holy Grail, but it's a little similar in that a vision of the Grail appears and fills the knights with joy and awe and also manifests their favorite food. Then afterward they all decide to go seek it. One thing most people don't know about the legend is that Arthur himself does not want the knights to go seek the Grail because he knows it will spell the end of the Knights of the Round Table. It's also not a great thing in the legend because the knights used to have unity and brotherhood, but on the quest they all go off in their separate paths and are now seeking a symbol of virtue rather than virtue for its own sake. And by the way, 99% of the knights either die or are defeated on the quest, so it's not the great triumph we usually think it is. By the way, every single mention you ever hear of the Holy Grail, as in the Holy Grail of internet marketing or the Holy Grail of juicy cheeseburgers, every single mention of the Holy Grail refers back to the Arthurian legend.
Jesus Christ!
The Rabbit of Carabanog, aka the Killer Rabbit, is one of the biggest laughs in the film, but doesn't so much have a clear antecedent in the legend. In the legends, the knights don't often have to slay monsters, so that might be more thinking of epic poems like Beowulf, in which our hero has to slay an awful creature attacking his village. But one theme that keeps coming back in the Arthurian legend is that things are often not what they seem, and things that look easy can be very difficult. So the idea that what looks like a harmless bunny is actually a vicious beast does kind of carry a theme of the legend. It's also another parody about how the knights are supposed to be so fearless and brave and never back down, so to see them shouting, "Run away!" as they flee is pretty hilarious. The effeminate prince who does not want to get married and draws Lancelot in to save him is kind of on target for the legend, especially how maniacally Lancelot and his incredible prowess and bravery is constantly lionized. The idea of Lancelot charging in and killing so many people is also kind of on point, because often Lancelot does leap in to rescue someone and kill a bunch of people before he actually starts asking questions or understanding the larger situation. It just happens that in the legend, Lancelot's usually always right and is never questioned.
What is the capital of Assyria?
The Bridge of Death is fairly true to the Arthurian legend in that there are several perilous crossings in the legend, and many times there's someone there refusing to let you cross or demanding a battle if you do cross. So, kind of accurate, but not much more to say about it.
You know much that is hidden, O Tim. Quite.
Finally, we get to Tim the Enchanter. Now, we know Merlin had to show up here sometime, right? The idea of naming this character Tim is a funny reaction to the florid and colorful names in the actual legend. And it's a bit accurate to the legend because Merlin's origins are pagan and he was originally cast as a wild man of the woods, so his portrayal here is pretty right on. The long stretch he spends just making explosions is also kind of accurate to Merlin being a bit of an arrogant show-off. Definitely an aspect of how he appears in the legend. Alrighty, that's about it. I hope this helped you appreciate the movie more by understanding how it relates to the actual Arthurian legend. Check out some of my other videos here if you want to learn more about the Arthurian legend, and check out my book series if you want to dive into fun and readable books that retell the authentic medieval legend of King Arthur. Thanks for watching, and see you later.